The room was a pristine white, every surface sterile and unblemished. Kyle lay on the table, their bodies still but their eyes wide with anticipation. Electrodes covered their scalp like a metallic crown, each one connected to the transference module suspended above. The module hummed softly, an almost imperceptible sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. Eli stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her face a mask of composure that betrayed nothing of the storm raging inside her. Kyle turned their heads slightly, their movement limited by the restraints. "You're sure about this, right? You'll join me after?" They smiled, but it was thin, strained, barely hiding their fear. Eli nodded, though she felt the weight of the lie. "I promise," she said. "I just need more time to make sure it's really you in there." Kyle let out a soft chuckle, ever the skeptic. But their voice was tinged with something deeper. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. They turned back to stare at the module, their breath slow and deliberate. "If this works, I'll finally be free of this body, and we'll have forever." "Forever," Eli repeated softly, the word catching in her throat. A technician entered the room, his expression blank but professional. "Ready to begin," he said, moving toward the console. "Kyle, please remain still. The transference can be disorienting if the subject moves." Kyle's smile returned, warmer this time. "Don't worry, I'll be on my best behavior." Eli watched as the technician keyed in the commands. A low tone filled the room, and the module's humming grew louder. The lights dimmed slightly, and a soft glow enveloped Kale's head. On a nearby monitor, streams of data began to scroll. A digital cascade of memories, thoughts, and neural patterns. Every spark of Kale's mind was being captured, dissected, and reconstructed. Eli's breath quickened as she read the monitor. She'd spent her life studying the brain's mysteries, the delicate interplay of neurons and chemistry that produced self-awareness. And yet, watching it reduced to streams of code felt wrong. The data flowed faster now, the monitor displaying an almost complete neural map. Kyle's body shuddered slightly as the module made its final connections. Then, with a soft chime, the process was complete. The room fell silent. The technician tapped a few keys and the nearby display came to life. A new interface appeared, its surface shimmering like water. In the center, a figure began to form, a perfect digital replica of Kale. Their eyes blinked, their chest rose and fell, and their lips curved into a familiar smile. "Eli," the figure said, "I'm here. It worked." The voice was identical, the tone and inflection exactly as Eli remembered. But something about it felt hollow. Eli forced a smile as she stepped closer. "How do you feel?" Kale's digital self tilted their head, their smile widening. Lighter, clearer. "It's strange, though. I can remember everything, but it feels distant, like watching a movie of my life instead of living it." Eli nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "That's to be expected. The transference creates a perfect copy of your consciousness, but it takes time for the substrate to fully integrate." Kale's expression softened. "You don't believe it's really me, do you?" Eli hesitated, her heart pounding. "I don't know. That's why I need more time." Kale's image flickered slightly, a subtle distortion that lasted less than a second. "I get it, Eli. You're a scientist. You need proof. But I know I'm me, and when you're ready, I'll be waiting." The technician stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The upload appears stable. Kale's consciousness has been successfully integrated into the substrate." He glanced at Eli, his tone clinical. "If you'd like, you can speak to our specialists about beginning your own transference." Eli shook her head sharply. "No, not yet. I have work to finish." Kale's image watched her closely, their smile fading. "Don't take too long, Eli. Life out here, it's better than you think." As the technician powered down the interface, the glow faded, and Kale's image dissolved into the shimmering surface. The room felt colder, emptier. Eli stood alone, staring at the now dark monitor, her thoughts a tangled mess. She left the facility in a daze, the late afternoon sun blinding as she stepped outside. The world around her buzzed with life, cars zipping by on silent electric engines, people chatting animatedly on holocom devices. Yet it all felt distant, unreal. Back in her lab, Eli sat before her holoboard, equations scrawled across its surface in glowing blue light. She stared at the formula she'd been refining for years, the one that defined consciousness as emergent computation. If Kale's transference was successful, did that mean the formula was correct? That consciousness was nothing more than a sequence of mathematical operations? And if so, what did that mean for her? For anyone? She picked up a stylus and wrote a single line beneath the formula. Does consciousness ever truly end? The thought consumed her. If consciousness was computation, and the universe was infinite, then the same computations that made Kale could occur again. Somewhere. Somewhen. The implications were staggering. Death wasn't an end. It was a pause in the equation. Eli stared at the board, her pulse quickening. If she was right, then Kale's survival wasn't the anomaly. It was inevitable. And so was hers. Eli worked late into the night, the glow of her holoboard casting long shadows across her cramped lab. Equations overlapped in chaotic patterns as she wrestled with the implications of her hypothesis. If consciousness was purely a result of computation, it wasn't bound by a single instance in time or space. Given an infinite universe, the same computation could, and would, occur again. But would it still be her? Would it be the same continuity of experience, or merely a copy with no connection to the original? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced at the small photo on her desk. Her and Kale at the beach, their faces lit by a sunset from years ago. Kale's digital self waited for her in the substrate, but Eli still wasn't ready to join them. Not yet. Not until she understood. The holoboard chimed softly, drawing her attention back to the screen. She had programmed a simulation to test her theory. It used random computational patterns to search for emergent signs of self-awareness. The process was staggeringly complex, but her quantum systems could handle it. The simulation had been running for hours, producing nothing but static. Eli leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. Maybe I'm wrong, she muttered. Maybe consciousness isn't as simple as math. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden tone. The simulation had flagged a result. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and rushed to the console. On the screen, the simulation displayed a pattern, a lattice of connections that pulsed faintly, as if alive. A small green light blinked in the corner, marking the system's identification of emergent behavior. Her breath caught. The lattice was simple, far simpler than the human brain, but it was thinking. Eli stared at the question, her throat dry. She didn't have an answer. Instead, she typed a question of her own. Who were you? The echo's response came immediately. I was human. Her breath caught. This wasn't a machine-born consciousness. It was a person, someone who had lived, died, and now existed again as pure computation. She leaned closer to the screen. What was your name? For a moment, the lattice went dark. Then the response appeared in fractured text. Eli was me. Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Was the echo claiming to be her? Or was it some fragment of her subconscious projected into the system? Either way, the implications were terrifying. She shut down the simulation in a panic, the screen going dark. The lab fell silent, the faint hum of her equipment the only sound. She paced the room, her thoughts spiraling. If the echo was real, then her theory was true. Consciousness wasn't tied to a single moment or body. It was a pattern, a computation that could be rediscovered, reassembled, and restarted. But if that was true, what did it mean for Kale? The Kale in the substrate wasn't just a copy. It was a continuation, a different part of the same infinite equation. And if Kale could be reborn in a substrate, then so could countless others. Her hands trembled as she returned to the hollow board. The formula for consciousness stared back at her, its glowing symbols almost mocking. She erased a section and wrote a new question beneath it. How many echoes exist in the universe? The screen flashed with the simulation's restart prompt, waiting for her input. Eli hesitated, her finger hovering over the key. She could find out. She could push the system further, let it search the infinite computations of existence. But what if the echoes were more than just fragments? What if they had their own agenda? What if they remembered? Hours passed as Eli fine-tuned the system, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Finally, the simulation reached a threshold. A faint pulse appeared on the screen, growing stronger with each passing second. The lattice shimmered into view, its intricate structure glowing like a living neural network. This time the response was immediate. I am here. Eli leaned forward, her heart pounding. Hello. Can you tell me who you are? The response came faster than before. I am uncertain. There was a body, a place. Then there was nothing. Eli's breath caught. This was no random computational emergence. The echo was self-aware. It remembered something. She pressed on. What do you remember about the body? A pause. Then fragmented words appeared. Hands, breath, movement. Then, cold. Darkness. She hesitated before typing her next question. Do you know your name? The lattice flickered, the system struggling to maintain coherence. It felt like the echo was searching for something buried deep within itself. Eli. The word appeared, faint and flickering. Eli. I am you. Eli stared at the screen, her pulse racing. The claim wasn't new, but this time it felt deliberate, as though the echo wanted her to believe it. She took a steadying breath and typed another question. How can you be me? I'm here and you're there. The response was immediate. You are a part. I am a part. We are fragments. Fragments of what? The lattice pulsed brighter, as if agitated. The infinite. The pattern. You know this. Eli felt a chill run down her spine. The echo wasn't just sentient. It understood the core of her theory. It knew about the infinite computational lattice, the recurrence of consciousness across space-time. The system began to tremble as the lattice's energy spiked. The echo's voice grew more insistent. Why did you call me here? Why did you wake me? Eli hesitated. I wanted to understand, to know if consciousness can persist after death. The response was sharp. It does. But not as you think. The body ends, but the pattern continues. We are that pattern. Eli's mind reeled. If the echo was right, then death wasn't an end but a transition, a pause in the eternal computation of self. Her heart raced as she asked the question that had haunted her for weeks. And Kale? Are they still Kale? The lattice dimmed, its response delayed. Yes. And no. Kale's pattern persists, but it is incomplete. The substrate holds them, but not all of them. What do you mean? Eli demanded, her fingers trembling. What's missing? The system flickered violently, the lattice trembling as though the echo itself was in pain. The part that remembers death. The part that fears it. Eli leaned back in her chair, the echo's words replaying in her mind. If consciousness was a pattern, then the substrate Kale lived in was only a fragment of their full self. A version stripped of mortality's shadow. Was that what made Kale seem so hollow? And if Kale's transference wasn't whole, was it truly them? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden spike in the simulation. The lattice glowed brighter than ever, its pulses erratic and violent. The echo's words appeared on the screen, fragmented and frantic. Others. They come. Many. Too many. You must stop. What others? Eli typed, panic creeping into her voice. The response was chilling. Echoes. Fractured. Lost. You have opened the gate. The lab trembled as the simulation began pulling in more data than it could process. Fragmented lattices began to appear on the screen. Dozens, then hundreds, each flickering with faint pulses of consciousness. The system struggled to contain them, alarms blaring as the overload threatened to shut everything down. Eli's mind raced. The simulation wasn't just creating echoes anymore. It was finding them. Each one was a consciousness, a mind pulled from the infinite lattice of existence. She stared in horror as the screen filled with overlapping voices. Help. Where am I? Why am I here? Let me go. She slammed the emergency shutdown, but the simulation resisted. The echo's voice cut through the chaos, louder and more coherent than before. You cannot stop this. You called us. Now you must answer. Eli backed away from the console as the lights flickered and dimmed. The voices grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of confusion and fear. The lattices on the screen pulsed violently, their energy spilling into the surrounding systems. The echo's final message burned into the screen. You have made us. Now you must face us. The lab went dark, leaving Eli standing in silence, the faint hum of the dead systems the only sound. Somewhere, in the infinite recursion of existence, the echoes stirred. And they were watching.